My name's Mark. It has taken me 2 long, agonizing years to reach this moment. This is not a confession, but a confrontation. It is the catalog of a life destroyed by deceit. I have extracted the lessons, processed the pain, and now I have to ask, do you remember when? It has taken me 2 long, agonizing years to reach this moment, to look at these memories and finally acknowledge them as true. For 2 decades, I lived in a carefully constructed theater of cruelty, a life destroyed by willful psychological, emotional, financial, and sexual abuse. I am still here, still standing, and that is a testament to the strength I didn't know I had. I look at our 2 beautiful children, 11 and 14, navigating a world suddenly stripped of its assumed certainties. Their mother moved out recently, leaving them with me after what I now call D-Day 4. It wasn't the final D-Day, just the 4th major confirmation that the life I cherished was a complete fabrication. She left them with me, a casual abandonment of her primary role, a final, stunning act of indifference. She threw away everything for the fleeting flattery of a personal trainer at her gym, an individual who was, by all evidence, a mentally unstable married father of a disabled child. The depth of that decision, the sheer transactional nature of her choice, still paralyzes me sometimes. It wasn't just a mistake. It was an exchange of 20 years of devotion for cheap validation. It took me 2 years of gaslighting and self-doubt to admit the reality to myself, to look head-on at all the evidence I had been so expertly blinded to. The fog was thick, a miasma of hope and denial, making me complicit in my own suffering. But the facts piled up, a cold, hard mountain I finally had the courage to climb. When we finally called time, it wasn't a choice, it was an act of survival. I recount this story under the title, Do You Remember When? Because the only way to heal is to confront the ghosts she left behind, memory by memory, lie by lie. I need to catalog the damage, not for her benefit, she's long past caring, but for mine, to prove that what happened was real, and that I was not the crazy one. Do you remember when you stood and made wedding vows in front of all of our family and friends? I can still see the light catching your veil, the practiced sincerity in your eyes as you promised forever. That day, I felt like the luckiest man alive, believing completely in the sanctity of the commitment we were making. Every word you spoke, to love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and in health, sounded like the absolute truth, the foundation of our entire future. We had built such a solid reputation, a couple that others envied, a partnership forged in shared ambition and young love. I spent years reflecting on that day, trying to reconcile the woman in white with the stranger who stood before me at the end. Did the vows mean nothing even then? Was that first promise already tainted by the potential for deceit? The memory of that perfect day is now poisoned, a beautiful facade covering a vast and empty space. You declared that you would always love and honor our relationship. But honor requires respect, and love requires honesty. You had neither for me nor for the institution we created. You took my faith and used it as the deepest possible cover for your lies, knowing I would never doubt a woman who had sworn such an oath. The memory is a sharp, brutal HE, not because I missed the day, but because I mourn the innocence I lost believing in your word. Do you remember when I caught you taking selfies in your gym gear in front of the bedroom mirror? The light was just right, the pose too deliberate, too practiced for a casual mirror check. When I asked what you were doing, your face flashed with a momentary panic, instantly masked by annoyance. You snapped that I was interrupting you, that you were just checking out the fit of a new top before your workout. But the angle was wrong for self-critique. It was perfect for projection. Those photos weren't for you, and they certainly weren't for me. They were assets, currency, for your hookup and dating apps. I saw the shadow of the phone in the shot later when I accidentally found them deleted but still recoverable. It was a cheap, tawdry setup in the very room where we were supposed to share intimacy, a silent declaration that our space, our sanctuary, was now a public market. It hurt that you were seeking validation, but it killed me that you were using our home, our bedroom, as your studio for infidelity. Every time I looked at that mirror afterward, I didn't see my reflection. I saw the ghost of a photograph being taken for someone else, a moment stolen from our life and sold for a handful of digital compliments. The shame wasn't yours, it was mine, for continuing to live in that theater. Do you remember when you'd let me take you out for dinner or drinks, and while I went to the bathroom, you'd sneak online? Those dinners were my attempts to rekindle the flame, my desperate effort to court the woman I thought was drifting away. I spent good money on nice restaurants, dressing up, trying to talk about our future, our dreams. I thought these dates were essential, crucial efforts to save us. To you, I was just a ride, a temporary distraction, a warm body to fill a seat. The moment I stood up, excusing myself to the restroom, you'd pull your phone out with lightning speed. You thought you were subtle, shielding the screen with your hand, your head bowed in reverence to the digital altar, to check for flirty messages. It was a frantic, necessary fix, a hit of attention more important than the man sitting across the table, paying the bill, hoping for connection. I saw the glow of the screen reflected in the mirror over the bar once. You weren't checking the time or looking at the children's schedule. You were laughing quietly, responding to a hidden life that was screaming for your attention. I walked back to the table, my meal suddenly tasteless, realizing I was nothing but a chaperone for your communication with another man. The ultimate date night humiliation. Do you remember when I found new sexy underwear in the wash and you told me that you'd bought it to wear for me? It was lace, vibrant, and completely unlike anything you usually wore, or anything I had ever bought you. My heart initially jumped, a small, foolish flicker of hope that you were making an effort, that maybe things were changing for the better in our sex life. When I asked about it, you immediately launched into the well-rehearsed narrative. You claimed that it was only in the wash because you'd worn it just once, to try it on for size without me. It was a performance of plausible deniability, delivered with a coy smile that felt like a secret handshake. You wanted me to believe you, wanted me to feel excited by the promise of future wear. You were banking on my desire, using my hope against me. The truth, of course, was brutally different. It was worn for him, discarded carelessly, and your attempt to pass it off as an object of my fantasy was just another level of emotional incest. You used the evidence of your infidelity as bait for intimacy with me. It was a cold, calculated move that turned my stomach, making me realize that even the most vulnerable moments we shared were choreographed lies. Do you remember when you and he started referring to your innocent spouses as the two Jace? Your J and my J. I found this phrase deep within a chat log, a casual, flippant exchange that cut deeper than any overt threat. The two J's, the sheer, chilling banality of it. It wasn't just cheating, it was a conscious, collaborative effort to erase our humanity. It was a secret language of contempt, a way to make us irrelevant in the narrative they were creating. They were actively dehumanizing me in much the same way as torturers dehumanize their victims so that they can blind themselves to the suffering they cause. By stripping us of our names, our history, our identities, reducing 20 years of love and partnership to a letter, you made it easier to violate us. We became obstacles, not people. It was a tactic of psychological warfare, ensuring that neither of you had to confront the reality of the two families you were simultaneously destroying. I was no longer Mark, the father of your children, the keeper of your vows. I was merely your J, a placeholder, an inconvenience whose feelings could be dismissed with a single, sneering initial. This was not a side effect of cheating, it was the core of your cruelty. Do you remember when accidentally you texted me, "Come to Crystal Palace for worms"? The text arrived innocently enough, a sudden, nonsensical blip on my screen that initially caused confusion, then a cold surge of dread. Crystal Palace is a local landmark, a hill with a view and woods, a perfect, discreet spot for a rendezvous. But worms. It was a stupid, clumsy code word, an attempt at espionage that was too lazy to be effective. You spent hours up there on the hill together that March day, fiddling on a bench and retreating into the woods. I know, because I drove past. I saw your car parked down a side street, half hidden. The image of the two of you, sitting there giggling over your shared secret, while I was at home, trying to keep life normal for the children, is etched in my memory. The absurdity was the final insult. Worms. That simple, ridiculous word became a metaphor for the sickness eating away at our foundation, the creeping infestation of lies that hollowed out our marriage. It was unprofessional, childish, and yet deadly serious. It confirmed that this entire clandestine operation was running on an engine of adolescent thrills, completely devoid of adult responsibility or moral compass. Do you remember when I started questioning suspicious bruises on your arms and thighs and you passed them off with, "I bumped into the gym equipment"? The marks were small but noticeable, appearing with increasing frequency, always in places that seemed strangely intimate. I wanted to believe you. I desperately needed to believe that the woman I loved was just clumsy, that her dedication to fitness sometimes resulted in minor accidents, My rational mind screamed that a personal trainer wouldn't allow his clients to constantly injure themselves. The explanation was always the same, delivered with a weary sigh, as if I was the one being tiresome. I bumped into the gym equipment. It was a shield, a throwaway line, designed to shut down inquiry immediately. The sheer volume of bumps should have alerted me sooner, but denial is a powerful anesthetic. Yes, you most certainly did. But it wasn't the elliptical machine or the weight rack. You were bumping into him. The bruises were physical evidence, irrefutable stamps of your betrayal, and you used the language of wellness to mask the physical truth of your affair. The lie was simple, effective, and perfectly designed to exploit my inherent trust. The emotional contortion of accepting that explanation, forcing myself to look away from the facts, was exhausting. Do you remember when, after finally finding the courage to seek you out in the park, I discovered sat giggling together on a bench? The decision to go to the park was not courageous, it was desperate. I was hunting for proof because the gaslighting had left me feeling utterly insane. My hands were shaking as I walked toward the far corner, hoping, praying to see nothing. But there you were. You were a tableau of domestic bliss, just not with me. You were sitting together on a bench, a perfectly framed picture of a couple absorbed in each other, utterly oblivious to the world. You looked happy, a light, genuine happiness I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The sight was a punch to the gut, a final, definitive period at the end of my life as I knew it. When you saw me, the giggling stopped, replaced by a momentary, icy terror that quickly morphed into resentment. From that point my mind and world unraveled apace, so you accused me of being untrusting and obsessive. You immediately flipped the script, transforming yourself into the victim of my paranoia. My distress, my genuine, justified pain, became a weapon for you to wield against me. You said that you thought me so paranoid that I should start seeing a therapist. And so I did. You successfully convinced me that the reality I was witnessing was an invention of my sick mind. I sought help for the madness you manufactured, detailing to a professional the symptoms of my justifiable grief and suspicion. The ultimate act of psychological manipulation was successfully redirecting my focus onto my own sanity, rather than your actions. Do you remember when you actively encouraged me to spend the life savings that had taken me almost 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears to accumulate? The plan was ambitious, to build an even bigger and more luxurious home for you and the children. You were the driving force urging me to liquidate assets, push the budget, and commit everything we had to this grand project. I saw it as a legacy, a final step in securing our family's future, a testament to my hard work. You saw it as an opportunity. You were laying the financial groundwork for your comfort, ensuring the collateral damage of your affair would land softly with marble countertops and designer fixtures. The irony is sickening. I poured my life force, 30 years of prudent saving, sacrificing, and dedication into building the cage for myself. And then you and he labeled the house your fake cast temple. The arrogance of that hashtag. Our home, the symbol of my devotion and our family's stability, became a cheap inside joke, a monument to their deceit. It implied a sacred shared space, a private joke at my literal expense. Every expensive wall, every polished floor now feels tainted, a permanent reminder that I finance my own betrayal. The financial ruin is secondary to the emotional. You encouraged me to spend my future, knowing you were planning to walk away from it, leaving me with the debt and the wreckage. It wasn't just infidelity, it was calculated financial sabotage. Do you remember when you found some of my private notes from therapy? You read them, and then you relayed their content to him. Those notes were sacred. They were the raw, unfiltered transcript of a man fighting for his sanity, detailing the symptoms of the gaslighting you inflicted. They contained my deepest fears, my vulnerability, my attempts to understand the emotional violence I was enduring. They were meant only for my therapist and me. You invaded that space, crossing a boundary so severe it redefined the meaning of ethical betrayal. You weaponized my healing process. You read the pages, internalized my pain points, and then, in a stunning act of cruelty, you relayed their content to him. It was a strategic leak of my military position to the enemy camp, thus empowering him further. He knew my weaknesses, my anxieties, the specific doubts I was processing about myself. This allowed both of you to tailor your gaslighting and manipulation with terrifying precision. You didn't just break my trust, you used my attempt to heal as ammunition against me. It was an act of premeditated psychological violence, tearing down the last walls I had left to protect my mind. Do you remember when you started to wear a medallion necklace just like his? The physical mirroring was deeply unsettling, a public, silent declaration of your psychological fusion. It was a deliberate signal, a way of binding yourselves together, even when I was standing right next to you. You wore it constantly, a visible tether to your secret life, daring me to ask about it. I was so broken by then that I barely could. But the worst was the violation of our intimacy. One time you held it between your teeth right in front of my face while you had intimacy with me. The act itself was degrading, turning a moment of supposed connection into a bizarre triangulation. You made him present, a phantom participant in our marriage bed. It was a performance of your devotion to him, a casual flick of contempt toward me, all happening in the most private moment we shared. I felt utterly used, a tool to manage your image while you mentally retreated to your fantasy. The act stole not just my dignity, but the last shred of physical love I thought we still shared. The medallion was a trophy, and I was the captive forced to admire it. Do you remember when you started telling people, with a straight face and oblivious to your ridiculousness and arrogance, that you are going to live to be the oldest woman in the world? This new obsession with longevity coincided perfectly with the affair, a desperate clinging to control and importance. It was part of the queen narrative he had fed you, a belief in your own invincibility and special status. The sheer absurdity of the pronouncement was breathtaking. You spoke it with such conviction, such unwavering self-belief, that others would simply nod awkwardly, unable to challenge the delusion. Which, healthier, told you that then. The irony was that the lifestyle you were leading, the stress, the deceit, the emotional chaos, was undoubtedly shaving years off your life and mine. It wasn't about health, it was about ego. It was a manifestation of the narcissism he cultivated in you, the belief that the rules of mortality and consequences simply didn't apply to the two of you. This ridiculous, arrogant claim was another way to distance yourself from the mundane reality of the life you were destroying, creating a fantasy future where you were exceptional and unaccountable. Do you remember when you observed my mental health finally hit rock bottom? The cumulative weight of the lies, the abuse, and the gaslighting finally became too much for my mind and body to bear. I entered a dark, terrifying place where reality bent and hope evaporated entirely. The day I reached such a dangerous low, I even had to call and speak to the Samaritans for over an hour. I was crying uncontrollably, struggling to articulate the profound sense of isolation and worthlessness you had engineered. I was fighting for my life, literally holding on to a fragile thread of sanity. And you knew it. You were present in the house, aware of the gravity of the situation, aware that I was talking to a crisis line. You saw the tears, the despair, the physical collapse. And yet, you carried on regardless. You didn't interrupt the call. You didn't check on me. You didn't for a single moment prioritize my life over your clandestine communication. That indifference was a worse betrayal than the sex. It was a cold, clinical decision to let me suffer, even to potentially let me fall, because your new obsession was more important than the man you vowed to protect. That moment proved you were not just cheating, you were actively sacrificing me. Do you remember when, one December morning, finally deciding to confront him on his church bench 100 feet from our home? The physical proximity of his actions was a deliberate, sickening mind game. This bench, so close to our children's school route, so near our front door, became his chosen stage for torment. It was a constant, visual reminder of his presence, a tangible insult. I reached my breaking point that morning, fueled by a mixture of rage and terror, needing him to acknowledge the human cost of his game. I approached him, not in a fit of violence, but of desperate clarity. I wanted him to see the man he was trying to destroy. But the stress, the trauma, and the cumulative damage to my heart finally caught up with me. I blacked out 3 times. The world went gray and silent, and I collapsed. I smashed and cut my head, bruised my body, and exacerbated a heart condition which then led me to the hospital. I woke up on the ground, bloodied, humiliated, and utterly alone, while he simply sat there, observing the destruction he had wrought. It was a physical price paid for the psychological torture. Yet after that, and for over a year before that, you did nothing to dissuade him from sitting there day in and day out, deliberately visible, willfully playing mind games like some deranged stalker. The sight of him, always there, became a source of crippling anxiety, and you protected his right to sit there, his right to torment me over my basic right to safety and peace in my own home. You chose the stalker over your husband lying in a hospital bed. Do you remember when I told you how he looked me in the eye and told me, their father, about how fond he was of, and how much he knew about our children? That moment was the true line in the sand. He didn't just invade our marriage. He crossed the threshold into my children's safety and my role as their protector. He named them for full impact, a calculated move to terrorize me, showing me the reach of his obsession. It was the moment the affair stopped being about infidelity and became a threat of violence and custody interference. He declared that he envied my life, my career, my money, our house. He was admitting that his goal was substitution, not love. He wanted to wear my skin, take my place, and steal my material successes. He was not a romantic hero. He was a jealous, predatory intruder. The police revealed they already have him on record and were concerned enough about his behavior that they wanted to there and then go to his place of work and tell him to keep his distance. State authority, a neutral third party, confirmed my fears. They saw him for what he was, a risk, a stalker, a person of interest. That should have been the final, incontrovertible piece of evidence for you. Yet, lost in limerence, you repeatedly chose to believe his word over mine, your loyal, caring, honest partner of 20 years. Nobody knows him like I do. That statement, uttered in defense of a proven stalker over the father of your children, was the ultimate, staggering testimony to your moral collapse. You valued his twisted reality over the safety of your family. Do you remember when I found out that he called you his queen? It was a term of endearment that felt grandiose and completely undeserved, a reflection of his need to elevate you to justify his pursuit, and your desperate need to believe the flattery. I already knew your relationship was built on lies, but the title solidified the fantasy world you inhabited. When I confronted you about that, you actually sneered at me and said, "Yes, and I like it." That sneer, that cold, superior curl of the lip was the death knell of my love for you. It was not regret, not shame, but pure, unadulterated contempt for me. You liked being his queen because it required you to do nothing but receive adoration, while being my wife required effort, maturity, and fidelity. That moment was the most honest you had been in years. The mask dropped, and I saw the true measure of your arrogance and self-absorption. The realization was stark. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by a brittle, entitled stranger who openly mocked my pain. Do you remember when you told me, "He may have sent me adult content links, but I never clicked on any"? Another lie, flimsy and easily disproved, but delivered with the same air of absolute conviction. You were trying to maintain a shred of plausible deniability, a tiny island of technical fidelity in a sea of emotional and physical betrayal. It was an insult to my intelligence, assuming I would accept your word as sufficient defense. But I had already crossed the Rubicon of investigation. I had the Broadband Hub website access records. They showed the truth. Not just links sent, but links visited. At times when you were supposedly doing laundry or watching television with the children, you were actively consuming the toxicity he offered, absorbing his fantasies into our home. The digital evidence was the final, undeniable accounting of your dishonesty. It wasn't just physical contact you were hiding, it was the depth of your emotional and sexual engagement, meticulously logged by our household router. The cold, immutable data spoke volumes, shattering your final, pathetic attempts at justification. Do you remember when we left yet another expensive marriage counseling session, and just as soon as we parted you texted him? We had just spent 90 minutes with a professional, pouring out years of pain, discussing strategies for repair, and committing, or so I thought, to mutual effort. The therapist had given us homework, hope, and a path forward. I left feeling cautiously optimistic, believing in the power of a shared goal. But as soon as the car pulled out of the parking lot and we were physically separated, the facade cracked. Before I could even reach home from the client lunch I had to attend, you were already reaching out. You texted him. The urgency was frantic, prioritizing his needs over the delicate, nascent healing process we had just agreed upon, in the hope you'd have time for a quick session before I got back home from the client lunch. The realization that every session, every tear, every dollar spent on counseling was just a smokescreen for your next rendezvous was devastating. You were using the marriage counseling as cover, a scheduled time slot where I was guaranteed to be out of the way. It wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a betrayal of the therapeutic process itself. Do you remember when you accepted from me endless thoughtful gifts, carefully planned nights out, and expensive holidays? I tried so hard to win you back, to remind you of the good we had, of the life we shared. I bought you the jewelry, planned the surprise weekends, and booked the elaborate trips, all in a desperate, last-ditch effort to compete with the cheap thrills he was offering. My love language was acts of service and gifts, and I poured all my remaining resources into proving my devotion, all the while engaging in infidelity. You wore the jewelry he had admired, used the luggage he had seen you pack, and smiled for the photos on the beach, all while your mind and heart were elsewhere. Every thoughtful gift became a transaction, a bribe, a payment for your continued presence. The memory of watching you open a gift, knowing your hands had just been on him, is a special kind of hell. It wasn't just acceptance, it was exploitation. You took the material tokens of my love and used them to fuel your life of deception, never once feeling guilt over the cost to my spirit or my wallet. Do you remember when 2 of our neighbors felt compelled to let me know they'd seen you together? Leaving the house, added one. The neighborhood watch. The collapse of my marriage was no longer a private tragedy, it was a public spectacle. It takes a monumental effort for neighbors to intervene, to risk offending a friend by sharing uncomfortable truth. They saw the pattern, the meetings, the deceit unfolding in plain sight, and their basic moral compasses compelled them to speak up. Leaving the house, added one. The specific detail was crucial. It meant the affair had crossed the final boundary, utilizing our matrimonial home, the sanctuary where our children slept, as a staging ground for your trysts. The violation was complete, the boundaries shattered. The neighborhood watch. They were, in a twisted sense, the final witnesses, the ones who saw the pattern and the calculated risk you took. I felt a surge of cold gratitude for their courage, immediately followed by the searing heat of public humiliation. Everyone knew before I did. The whole street, the whole community, was watching the disintegration of my life, a reality I was the last to accept. Do you remember when you would kiss your children goodnight on the lips after you had met with him on the way home from work? That routine was sacred, a final moment of connection and safety before the children went to sleep. You'd come home from the gym or errands, smelling of unfamiliar cologne and something sharper, something chemical that I now recognize as deceit. Yet, you'd perform the nightly ritual with perfect maternal affection, never once betraying the contamination you carried. Even when I told you I could smell him, I whispered it, heartbroken, desperate for you to stop, to confess, to show a flicker of human guilt. You simply dismissed it, claiming it was the gym's air freshener or the new scent of your laundry detergent. Another lie used to protect your secret. The image of that tainted kiss, the transfer of his presence onto the innocent faces of our children, is unbearable. It was a physical manifestation of your moral compromise, a sickening blending of your 2 worlds. You used their trust and their love as a final filter, washing off the sin of your encounter before facing me. It was the deepest cut, a profound betrayal of your role as a mother. Do you remember when you carelessly exposed me to STDs? This is not an abstract fear, this is physical, measurable risk. The culmination of your recklessness went beyond emotional devastation. It involved the literal compromise of my physical health and safety. You had unprotected sex with a stranger multiple times, and then continued intimacy with me, placing my body on the line without my knowledge or consent. The shock of the doctor's visit, the required testing, the waiting for the results, it added a layer of medical horror to the emotional trauma. You traded my health for a cheap thrill, demonstrating a level of indifference to my well-being that is still difficult to comprehend. The violation was absolute mind, heart, and body. This wasn't just cheating, it was assault. It was the moment I realized you truly had no regard for me as a human being, only as a utility. The fear, the shame, the rage I felt in that sterile clinic waiting room still bubbles up. Do you remember when you were still able to convince yourself that it's only your dalliances with him that I know about? There was a moment, even toward the end, where you believed you were still controlling the narrative, that the scope of my knowledge was limited to what I had specifically, undeniably proven. You saw my discoveries as isolated events, not as indicators of a pervasive, all-encompassing deception. The look in your eyes when I laid out the timeline, the evidence of other partners, the complete history of your double life, that's a look I will never forget. It was the look of a puppet master whose strings were suddenly cut, realizing the audience saw the whole performance. You thought I was a chump, easily contained, easily managed. You were wrong. I became an investigator, driven not by curiosity, but by a desperate need for the truth to be the only thing left standing. The betrayal wasn't singular, it was systemic, a lifestyle of calculated falsehoods that stretched back years, and you thought you could still compartmentalize my knowledge of it. Do you remember when you swore onthe levius of our innocent, defenseless children that you were not being unfaithful? That was the lowest point, the ultimate moral vacuum. You used the one thing I cherished above all others, the two souls I would die to protect, as collateral for your lies. The words were delivered with a tearful, convincing passion, the performance of a lifetime. I wanted to believe you so badly that for a time, I did. To invoke their names, their very existence, as a shield for your infidelity is a depravity I cannot reconcile. It proved that in the hierarchy of your values, your secret comfort ranked higher than the moral integrity you owed your own children. You contaminated their innocence with your false oath. You swore on their lives, and you were lying. I now know you put a curse on your own integrity, selling your soul for a fleeting moment of self-preservation. That oath is the one thing you can never take back, the one action that defines your moral bankruptcy forever. Do you remember when you lost all of your self-respect? It wasn't a sudden moment, it was a slow, deliberate surrender. It happened when you started mirroring his clothes, when you repeated his contemptuous jokes about your husband, when you used your children as props for your lies. You traded your genuine self for the reflection he held up to you, a brittle, shallow image of a queen that required you to shed all decency. You became small, defined by the approval of a man whose character was confirmed by the police as deeply troubled. You shade your kindness, your warmth, and your honesty in exchange for his cheap flattery. The most tragic loss in this entire affair wasn't our marriage. It was the woman you used to be. You killed her yourself slowly, deliberately, and with no apparent regret. How about a penny for your present thought? Do you remember when you saw the genuine shock, the profound, bone-deep disgust on the faces of people who had been your friends when they finally understood the depth of your calculated cruelty? They weren't judging the affair. They were recoiling from the methodology. They were staring at the lies about the children, the theft of the therapy notes, the cruelty of the church bench game. These were not mistakes of the heart, they were actions of a cold, calculating mind. Their faces mirrored the horror I had felt for 2 years, finally validating my experience. You lost your entire social support system, not because you cheated, but because of how you cheated. Do you remember when you tried to explain all of this destruction, all of the chaos you unleashed, by pathetically mumbling something about how you just felt unseen, or needed an emotional connection? That excuse, the universal anthem of the unfaithful, was the final insult to my intelligence. I saw you, I worshipped you, I paid for your luxurious home, I put your name first for 20 years, and you returned it with contempt. You didn't feel unseen, you simply didn't like the kind of seeing that required you to be accountable, mature, or decent. You needed validation, not connection. You needed a reflection of your own inflated ego, and I refused to provide it, so you found a man who would. Do you remember when our 14-year-old asked if you were coming back for Christmas, and I had to tell them the truth about why you had gone, and their face just crumbled? I protected you for so long, offering vague, gentle half-truths about needing space. But that question, simple and desperate, demanded the truth. Telling them, carefully, painfully, that their mother chose her own needs over their stability, that she replaced their certainty with her selfishness, was the hardest thing I have ever done. I watched their innocence shatter in real time. You broke my heart, but you broke theirs too, and that is a wound you can never heal. Do you remember when you walked out the door and, for the first time in 2 decades, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even known was crushing me? The air in the house changed the moment the latch clicked behind you. It was cleaner, quieter, no longer thick with the humidity of lies and secrets. That feeling of lightness, of sudden, unexpected serenity, was the first breath I'd taken in years. That was the sound of my freedom, a sound you will never hear because you are still imprisoned by your own deceit. You are still performing for the small, toxic audience of one man's ego, while I am finally off stage. Do you remember when you lost the only person in the world who was willing to truly fight for you, to the point of breaking himself, because he believed in the goodness you pretended to be? I fought for the memory of you, the potential of us, the woman I thought was worth rescuing. I pushed my body into the hospital and my mind to the brink of collapse, trying to preserve the life we built. I fought for your integrity, even when you had none left to defend. That fight is over, and you lost the one man who saw your light and desperately tried to keep it from being extinguished. Do you remember when you finally understood that the pedestal he put you on was a lie, and the real queen he worshipped was his own ego? He didn't love you. He loved what you represented, a victory, a conquest, a convenient escape from his own pathetic reality. You were a temporary distraction from his disabled child and his own failings. The adoration was a reflection, not a genuine feeling. When the novelty wears off, or when he finds a new object to validate his masculinity, you will realize that you sacrificed everything for a hollow, temporary throne. The real ruler of his world has always been himself. How about a penny for your present thought? My present thought is that I am done remembering. The process of confronting these memories is complete, and I am done with the "do you remember when?" questions that only serve to replay the trauma in my head. I have extracted the lessons, processed the pain, and cataloged the evidence. The statute of limitations on your influence in my life has finally expired. I'm done letting your "remember when" define my now. The past is a country you inhabit, but I have defected. I am no longer tied to the narrative of my victimhood. I remember the day you left, and that's the only one that truly matters, because that's the day I started living again, with a clear conscience and an open heart. You get to keep your shame. I get to keep my children, my integrity, and my future. You destroyed our vow, but you didn't destroy me. You just set me free, and for that I will be forever grateful. The story isn't about what you did, it's about what I survived, and how I finally chose myself.